hand in hand. We the people understand that there's an
Want
answer,
peace?
there's a way.
No drone killings, no arms sales. WomenAgainstWar.org. Check out the website. It's an organization headquartered in Albany at the Social Justice Center, 33 Central Avenue, right where the roads, Western Avenue and Washington Avenue and Central Avenue come together. Something to think about. If we want peace, stop the killings. Stop the arms sales. I'm your host, Lou Ismay. We'll go on with some of the news. Oh, welcome to DN News and Review. Anyway, shocking story. What's a shocking story? Shocking story, interview on Democracy Now! How a Chicago cop killed a teen, then arrested the man and accused him of killing his friend. The result was a long jail term. This has just recently been exposed. He was serving 32 years for armed robbery, which it was, and then in addition, 20-year sentence for murder. Now, this happened in 2012, 19 years old at the time. So, Tevin Lewis is still in jail. Will he be released? Will there be any justice to come of this? Now, apparently in Chicago, this kind of relationship, if it's called a relationship, has happened a number of times where white police officers accuse black people of something that they did not commit. It's part of the problem, isn't it? Black lives matter. Of course, all lives matter. But in our country, we need to be honest with ourselves. There's a large number of people who believe that it's wrong to have abortions. And so they focus on all fetuses matter. It's murder if a fetus is life, if it's a life already, but whatever, it's terminated. But there's virtually no care for the children who grow up. So we are guilty of children's lives don't matter. Have we ever thought of that? What would the world be like if we adults conduct our affairs as if children truly matter? We, through neglect, allowing poverty to continue the way it is, poor housing, food shortages, we have new names, food insecure, or whatever the term is. So if there's a cover-up, well, maybe it is. But if we're honest with ourselves, and we really care for one another, or about one another, then we start with the children. Does that make sense? It may not to some, but it may to enough people so that eventually we can change our culture and our attitudes toward one another, and especially children. Anyway, this is an outrageous and shocking disclosure. The story goes on, and if you want to see it all or read it all, it's the January 22nd issue of Democracy Now! Just Google it yourself. Now, there's another thing that's shameful, shocking. This is our war, and it is shameful. And journalist Andrew Cockburn was interviewed in Democracy Now! On the U.S. war in Yemen. Now, where is Yemen? Yemen is on the east side of Africa. It's right here. And what's going on, we'll be back in a moment.
We lost the camera.
All right, well, anyway, we'll go on and talk. Saudi Arabia and Yemen have a common border. And the Saudis want to get rid of some of the people in Yemen. And it's the reason that we support our allies in Saudi Arabia. Well, we'll forget about the map.
We got the map.
Is it coming on? Oh, okay, here it is. There's Yemen. This is the border. So we supply armaments. The Saudis buy it from us. Tanks and planes, whatever paraphernalia that is needed for combat and violence across the border. And they're wiping out a group of Yemenis. So the bombing continues. Even before the Saudi-led bombing campaign in Yemen began more than a year ago, Yemen was ranked as one of the poorest countries in the world. But now, a year and a half into the war, Yemen's health system has broken down. The population is facing the threat of starvation. And so Andrew Cockburn, the editor of the Harper's Magazine, his latest piece in Harper's was Acceptable Losses, Aiding and Abetting the Saudi Slaughter in Yemen. And he's the author of A Kill Chain, The Rise of the High-Tech Assassins. So the country is being devastated. Hospitals are being bombed, especially the hospitals. Special egregious is the fact that the doctors who volunteer their time from a number of countries are killed, maimed, injured, patients suffering the same. What's going on, and why are we doing it? What about the conscience of our country? Now, we're divided in many ways. People of diametrically opposed positions, or something in between the extremes. But what about the idea of negotiations? What about the idea of holding back on our weapons? How about doing something differently? Whatever we would decide it should be. But this constant violence, this constant interference with other countries, taking sides, it may be the contemporary way of doing business. But should we reconsider? Should we come to alternate means of conducting our foreign affairs and not engage in the massive destruction of other people? There's been a historic shift. U.S. government has made a decision to end the use of deadly, costly, negligent private prisons. Now, in recent weeks, we talked about this issue of Mother Jones News. It was written by an article by Shane Bauer. You may remember Shane was one of the three people who were captured and held by Iran. Here we got this page here. We have it marked. Let's get it right here, and you can take a look at the headline. This was the story. Prison experiment. 4 months as a private prison guard. Stabbings, lockdowns, escape, and officers and inmates pushed to the edge. Now, there's no way to know for certain, but this was what the effect of this story was. But the issue of Mother Jones News was devoted to the private prison system and the private prison transportation system, which is somewhat similar in terms of working together, but it has its own problems. And people die needlessly. People are beaten, sometimes beaten to death. Prisoners denied nutritious food, even though they're by contract supposed to be supplied. Health facilities, health care, most of the time seems to be denied. So now the idea is that as costly as it is, it's at least not going to result in such poor care of other human beings. A prison, in a way, is almost like a vengeance. But here it is. Just read a few lines of this. In what some are calling a historic change in policy, the Justice Department says it will phase out the use of privately run federal prisons. And in a memo describing the policy shift, Attorney General Sally Yates said research showed private prisons, quote, simply do not provide the same level of correctional services, programs, and resources, and do not save substantially on costs. Now, that's the federal system. We'll see what happens with the state system. But in our state, there is a situation that exists that we ought to change. The Census Bureau considers, after the census is taken, considers the people who are incarcerated in the prisons in rural communities. The entire population is considered to be the population of the community. When the prisoners are released, they go back to their own communities, which generally are impoverished urban sections of our larger communities. There isn't money enough to correct the situations that result in prisoners and people doing things and then being incarcerated. It seems to be more equitable, more sensible, to have all prisoners counted as members of the communities in which they resided and to which they will return. Doing so would provide enough money to help to alleviate the poverty, provide better health care when needed, and certainly better educational opportunities. So that's going to be a big issue in our state, and we're going to have to confront that very soon. If you have any comments, make them by the 1st of September. Send your comments to the Census Bureau. We'll go on to other news. Well, these prison runs, one more thing on that. Prisons may be phased out, but industry leaves a trail of bodies from medical neglect and abuses. And that's really not well explained in the media. So there'll be 13 private prisons gone. Stocks have been plummeting because the prisoners have been commodified. We have a habit with our kind of economic system, the importance of money and the importance of earning or making more money. So those who've invested are not doing so well now, and we'll see what happens. That may be the demise of the entire system, but at any rate. So we go on to the next thing. Native people. Indigenous people in our country have been fighting for justice, been going on for years. About 500 years, actually, more or less. Europeans came looking for adventure, principally looking for shorter roads elsewhere in the world. And we know those stories, part of our heritage. But in a way, it was genocide that disseminated or decimated the indigenous population. It happened also, by the way, this is not a laughing matter, but it's ironic, in Palestine, Israel. Back about the turn of the 20th century, especially after World War I, the indigenous people, Palestinians, were not considered to be people because they didn't have the same kinds of activities and culture and ideas that the Europeans had. They were ignored. And so we have a situation there that with which we are confronting peace in the Middle East. Genesis started when people, in their minds, considered the Palestinians as non-people. That whole attitude in North America and South America, same thing. Right now, some of the indigenous people in our country, we call them American Indians, and that's how they refer to themselves, want to stop pipelines, especially in North Dakota, that part of the country. They are objecting to crude oil obtained by fracking, to be transported to the coast, Washington, Oregon, wherever there are refineries. So they're taking a stand. In the interesting interview with Winona LaDuke, you may remember she was a running mate for vice president running mate candidate along with Ralph Nader. Pipeline company Enbridge has no right to destroy our future. And so that's what the story is. The Sacred Stone camp where people are blockading. There's a $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline. It will cross the Missouri River in at least two places. It will cross also other watersheds, or watersheds. There's a danger in that area of the large aquifer, anyway. Have to make my apologies. The interesting thing is that indigenous people are more concerned about water quality than we seem to be. Water quality has been destroyed, springs and so forth, even in the Grand Canyon area, which is somewhat south of that area. Uranium mining poisons the water. Leaching there. Crude oil will poison the water. There are toxic substances in that oil. So, what should we all be thinking about? Should we take any chance? The best engineering sometimes goes awry. Should we be willing to damage what turns out to be, on a global basis, a very important and increasingly scarce resource? Good, clean, pure drinking water. Bottled water that we buy frequently does not come from a natural source, but rather from a water tap someplace. Water has been purified or cleaned at the water treatment plant. Sometimes we take sewage water and clean it. Supposedly it's safe. Some people don't think so. So this whole idea of bottled water is that the bottled water is cleaner and safer and purer, which may not be the case. That may not be the situation at all. However, are we interested enough to look into the situation in our own communities and somehow express our desire for government to ensure that all the water, possible source of water for human consumption, for use on land, because it affects the crops that grow, all of that be secured from any possible contamination. Something to think about? Anyway, so one more thing on that issue. The chairman of this at the Dakota Access Pipeline spoke about damaging or threatening the lives of his people. It's the Standing Rock Sioux tribe that are taking the lead in this particular opposition and are being joined by people from other tribes across the country. So we have some other things about which to talk. We may come back to some of the news later on. But we have a story that we've been withholding for some time. We'll schedule it in today. It's a story that goes back to 1945. This is the book, printed in China. There's the title. (1945). And what is it? It's a collection of photographs taken by a U.S. Army medical doctor.
No.
Photograph. Dr. Millett. We'll look at some of these. because they're kind of interesting. Well, that on the right, the photograph of the Times. Two roads were being built in Southeast Asia at the time. Two roads, the Burma Road and the Lida Road, through mountainous terrain. This is the mountainous terrain. Now this is built by local labor, U.S. military, engineers, and so. It was built because the Japanese were attacking China, and in order to get supplies into China, had to get roads built. Could not bring everything in with aircraft. So one started from Burma, the other from India, and went across the rugged terrain. We'll get some photographs of this. This is a celebration when both roads were completed. A view of a Chinese butcher shop. You can go down to Chinatown, New York City, and see the same thing. This is a photograph of the map, the route which was flowing at that time, 1945, starting here at West Palm Beach, coming across Brazil, hopping the Atlantic, coming across here, and into China. We've heard of the Flying Tigers. The Flying Tigers was the Air Force, Army Air Corps contribution to the world at that time. This is the kind of terrain. Look at the size of some of these boulders and rocks. Imagine that, the terrain. Now, convoy of tanks, people celebrating the opening of the road, which supplies could be brought in. These were the 18-wheelers of that time. You could only have this size vehicle on the roads because of the conditions. 18-wheelers could have been used, but with some difficulties. Now, this is reminiscent of the period. You can't afford to miss either. Buy bonds every payday. Now, this was printed by the Chinese government because Dr. Millet's son saw that the Chinese government received a copy, were put on display, and now are considered to be a national treasure. And we show this because, first of all, something that we might think was unimportant in our lives, like a set of photographs, could be very, very important to people elsewhere, whatever it happens to be. But the other part of this is that Dr. Millet's son, Greg, passed on recently, and it's going to be a celebration on his behalf. It's going to be on Sunday, the fourth Sunday, which is coming up in August. It's going to be at the Singles Outreach Club. That's Greg Millett and his friend, longtime friend. It's going to be in his memory.
The Albany Dance Sport Team.
Pardon me?
Members of Albany Dance Sport Team.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's both groups.
Oh, I didn't. All right, sure. They're both groups. We're going to be part of this. Thanks. And at that event, a man named Herschel Allen is teaching swing dancing. He's going to give some swing dancing lessons starting at that time. And the charge for attending the event is right here. There's the date. There's the time. There's the venue. It's at 638 Columbia Extension in Latham. So, an opportunity to learn swing dancing, which is kind of fun and strenuous, before it's an entirely lost art. You may want to participate. This is the current issue of Mother Jones. Just arrived. This is a story in it, and we'll get to that story another time. There's one of the most famous pictures. But the story has to do with something here that's really much of great interest. A story about black teachers. And the story is that black teachers matter. Now this is a photograph, and we can look at this. Right, we let you read it. Darlene Lomax. She was a principal. At a meeting one morning with her staff, she received an email indicating that the school was going to close. About 130 some odd schools have been closed in New York City, but this is in Philadelphia. It was the beginning of closing schools in urban neighborhoods where they were most needed. Now, her story is the story of teachers, thousands of whom have lost their jobs because of cost cutting. And the idea that teachers' employment is dependent almost entirely on the scores that their students get on standardized tests. If you've ever taught, realize how much time is spent teaching students about taking tests and drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling, hopefully that they get it right, because your job will depend on it. Federal government support for the schools will depend on it. No child left behind was one of the concepts, except it turns out that millions of children have been left behind just because of the system. Standardized tests is a private industry. Tests are made up. School spends great sums of money purchasing them, administrating them, and scoring them. Even though some of this process might be automatic, it's not always the case. Children's lives matter. It turns out that the teachers' jobs and the teachers matter also. Teachers cannot control the students when they're in their own homes, their own neighborhoods. If the family is impoverished, does it affect the children? If the family doesn't have enough to eat, does that affect the children? The clothes that the children wear, does it affect their morale or anything? Those who raise a family successfully understand the need for parental supervision or assistance. Time to do your homework. What questions do you have? Testing them, teaching them. If the children have a parent like that, or parents like that, they're the most fortunate because they can excel in the educational system, not just to excel within the system, but excel afterwards. High school, college, and they seem to do well. We consider children important as a heritage. We speak about them being precious. They are our future. We can hear all sorts of comments like that. All we have to do is listen without judgment, just take it all in and realize what's going on. Now, it turns out that black teachers, according to records, are extremely interested in the fact that the children in their classrooms succeed. Color is not a factor. A standard is a factor. Classroom is a standard. We all learn, we all help one another, whatever the standard is. Teachers frequently have the students who are more adept at a subject helping those who are less gifted to learn. There was a lesson we learned from the one horse, one room schoolhouse. So this is a story then. It's by Christine Rizka. Darlene Lomax was part of a generation of African American educators determined to make schools work for all children, and who drove them away. Philadelphia, number of black teachers fell 18.5% between this year and that year. In Chicago, it dropped 40%. These are 4 children. That's the school that was closed, still closed. Another school closed, fenced. Children can't get even on the steps to play. This is a photograph of the history teacher, Ishmael Jamires. He was in the process of buying a home. He was teaching in the neighborhood. Children were doing extremely well. He was excited about teaching, found out they didn't have a job. His plan was to teach, live in the community, raise his family there. Didn't happen. In the Germantown area of Philadelphia. And here you can read it yourself. Spent his life and career in the neighborhood. Now, this is but one example something more to read, and then we'll look at some statistics. By the close of that school year, Philadelphia had 3,885 fewer staff members, teachers, nurses, aides, including secretaries, even though it's not listed there, because the school needs that kind of a job to keep things going, take care of a lot of the administrative nitty-gritty things. In 2 years, close to 4,000 lost. Now the statistics. In the year 20034, there were that many public school teachers in the country. 7.9% were black. 8 years later, African Americans made up only 6.8% of teachers. That was a decrease of 26,000 teachers. During that period, 54% of students were white. 82% of the teachers were also white. These are white. This color is coming out darker than it is on the magazine. This represents black students. This represents Latino students. This represents Asian students. And this represents a mixture. Now, teachers. These are where the statistics came from. You have this many white teachers. Black, Hispanic, Asian, a mixture of other countries, other ethnicities. So, since 2000, the percentage of black teachers in a number of big urban school districts has dropped dramatically. Boston, minus that whites. Look at the number of blacks compared to the whites and the Hispanics. New York City, let's drop there. White, drop. Black, look at the difference between this and the Hispanic. Look at this right across the board here. A higher percentage of black students affected. Now, this is a little bit of something going on that doesn't interest many of us very much. So many other issues that we face in the world and in our own lives. But what is the implication of this kind of information? When we think of the loss of potential, children who are not well enough informed, don't have enough opportunities, fall into a category of nothing much to do but the excitement of opioids or the drugs, all kind of nefarious activities, can and does land them in jail. It's almost a direct path from the situation that exists in the schools to the jailhouse. Other people have reported, it's been reported a number of times. The interpretation is slightly different. The statistics a little bit different. But is a clear trail. So it's our country. This is part of what needs to be thought about. People look for change. Is this something that needs to be changed? We have time for a few more little stories here. We'll go on. This is a little bit different. Current issue of National Geographic. The big story we'll get to about blindness. We'll get to that another time. But the story we want to bring today has to do with fur, F-U-R. You may remember that there was a big campaign back in the 1960s. We don't wear fur. It's wrong to kill. We have synthetics, let's wear that. But fur has become fashionable again. Furs and skins are being embraced by designers, hip-hop stars, and China's wealthy, amid a push to make the life and death of captive animals more humane, and this is a mink. Mink farming is back in void. It was very popular in the 1950s. People invested, it were investments in backyard mink farms. This is the caiman. The caiman is a type of alligator. A worker on the farm in Cambodia, or Colombia rather, prepares a brown caiman killed earlier by a single cut to the back of his neck. He will be skinned, sliced from head to tail. Caiman leather is not considered as luxurious as American alligator, and is thus less expensive, but that's in Colombia. It's an international thing, principally so far. These are ostriches. This is in Thailand. Ostriches are used, their skin is tanned, used for luxurious leather goods, and the meat is becoming more and more popular. As a matter of fact, it's probably safer and less dependent on precious water than raising cattle in cattle feed. So we go on. These are some of the new designs. These are models waiting to walk on and down the runway in Milan. Milan is one of the fashion capitals of the world. So is New York City. We'll look at some statistics a little bit later on regarding that, but here we go into something else. These are ostriches, and this female with her lost feathers is an indication of how aggressive the males are. They're so aggressive that they are kept apart, and they are frequently kept separately with one or two females. But you see how this chap, anyway. And this is a view on display. Notice the break here. So this is a vertical wall. The illusion is that it goes on up to those samples of fine leather goods. The fine leather is expensive. Ostrich, alligator, caiman. People who buy them are from China, Russia, principally, other countries in which there is a booming economy, and people are becoming more worldly in their living standards and so. the Western standard. We all don't live the Western standard, but we do live in the West. Now this is an indication of how the fur trade or design has expanded. New York, a fashion capital, this is the total number of shows during this period. There were 156 shows. 91 of them featured fur, leather. In Paris, another fashion capital, of the 92 shows, that many. In London, a third fashion capital, of the 79, that many. Milan is the same. Even more so, 65 out of 55. Almost 2/3 of the women's fall 2016 collections in major fashion shows include fur clothing. Now, exploiting animals. Anyway, so that's going on. We may not all be aware of it, but there may be something there that we ought to know. And we look at a couple more photographs here and another statistic. These are ostrich. The meat has been taken off. These are the skins. And because of the texture, notice this, becomes highly desirable. Those are sewn into, created, used in whatever garments or containers like purses or pocketbooks or wallets and so that are going to be manufactured. And just so we have a little idea of what's going on. It's a little difficult to see, but there are 3 types of animals here. This is mink, global trade, what it was back in 1950, a peak there and a peak there. In that year, 84 million animals. Global production of mink in millions. Can you imagine that? There's a difference between caiman and alligators and crocodiles. Crocodile skins in millions. Caiman, alligators, crocodiles. Now, that gives some sort of an idea of what's going on. Whatever comments we have, they can be favorable or unfavorable, but it's a business, and it's a business opportunity, whether we like it or not. We'll get into some other things in the coming weeks, hopefully informative, not just about business, but the way it turns out the way we quite possibly are, according to studies by people who know more certainly than we do as a staff, but calling it to our attention because in the wind is change. We hear it from our political candidates for public office, especially on the national level. What will that change be? And what input do we have in the process of thinking it through. Do we have some principles by which we want to live? Raise our children. There are grandparents who are seriously concerned about their children and their grandchildren, and even those who are lucky enough to have them, great-grandchildren. Something that's in the wind. And what shall we do about it? There's another story that we're thinking about, and this one has to do with this Yes magazine. This is a current issue with Yes magazine, this logo. It has to do with something that's going on. Homes designed to bridge the generations, where children and retired people live in adjacent communities or in different parts of a same community and gather together. The children love it. There's one photograph here that'll be indicative of it all. One called Grandma. In this case, she happens to be German extraction, Una. Other the children are just enjoying it. Everybody is learning, feeling good about themselves, and stronger and healthier. Thank you for watching. I've been your host, Lou Ismay. Thank Glenn Jarrett for his engineering and his reminding every once in a while. Pay attention to what's going on. Support the independent book houses, independent hardware stores, including the bakeries and the candy makers, the chocolate makers, which seem to be disappearing. A disgraceful thing, don't you think? Anyway, pay attention to what's going on. We'll see you the next time. Hope you'll be with us. Bye.
That there's an answer, there's a way. We the people have to say. So send the orders to prepare, that we the people do declare. Send the good news, send the word. We the people will be heard. We the people everywhere. There's a message in the